Ha ha! Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to Love Talk, Lovebabz Love Talk. I'm cold. Oh my God, it's cold. It's like a deep freeze.
It's hard to love when you're cold, Babz.
It's like a tundra. How are you?
I'm good.
All right, so today's the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and I have the pleasure of chatting with Susan Yolen, who is the Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy for Planned Parenthood Votes, Connecticut.
Yep.
Hello.
That's me. Hi.
You've been here before.
I've been here before. It was fun.
All right, so I was prepared to talk all about where we are with Roe v. Wade, but you sent me an email that shook me to my core, and I was freaked. It freaked me out because I was like, wait a minute, this takes me in a whole other.
I know, it freaked me out too. That's why I sent it to you.
It takes me to a whole other dimension, and I so Susan sent this piece over that says the real question isn't how to save abortion rights, but how to prepare for their absence. Like, I've never heard that. I've always heard fight. Like, we're just going to keep fighting, even though it's ridiculous to keep fighting because it was settled. But here it is, always coming up on somebody's radar to gut.
And here we have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, ill, frail, elderly, and, strong in her own way, but she can't sit on the Supreme Court forever. And if she's replaced
she's
by
like
Donald
96,
Trump,
isn't she?
Well, I think she's 86, but really, how many of us 86 are actively, pursuing intellectual and important, pursuits that the world is depending on?
So there's that discussion. And then the other thing that's challenging to me is, why didn't she just get off when Obama was in office and he could have appointed somebody of his liking? Like, he could have appointed another her, but somebody who could, be around a bit.
Well, he did appoint Kagan and Sotomayor, so
yeah, but
I think he felt like he'd already.
But this current administration are looking to do real harm, and so if he gets another pick,
yep,
Kavanaugh on top of
Gorsuch,
I don't.
Awful.
I don't. Women might as well. We might as well just get the Handmaid's Tale outfits.
Yes, there are those who have them.
We
you
might
can
as well
buy them.
We might have to start getting ready for that now.
Yeah.
So the other piece that you sent me, if Roe v. Wade falls, women will go to jail.
Right.
What's the optics on that? Do we want to see women march to jail for the right to choose what is in their best interest of their health?
I know. And well, we've always talked about that as a outlandish outcome of illegal abortion. Would we really put women in jail? Would we put doctors in jail? And, for all those years before Roe, doctors really put their careers and lives at risk.
Mm-hmm.
When they performed abortions. And often there was a wonderful film about this where doctors said that they would swear their patients to secrecy, and no one ever turned a doctor in. So and one of the things the article impressed upon me this morning was that back then there wasn't an organized anti-abortion movement.
Mm-hmm.
These things, whatever happened criminally, was episodic and scattered. And now there's this very blatant, organized, unified group of folks and organizations and legal experts that they believe have their interests and do have plans and thoughts about what to do next,
Mm-hmm.
how that would all happen state by state. And that there are already cases where pregnant women who have behaved in a particular way. There was one example about a woman who fell down the stairs and miscarried and was accused of attempting fetal homicide. And so the behavior.
And we're going to this country is going to spend time doing that.
Exactly. When we have all sorts of other emergencies and global warming confronting us, for Pete's sake. Right.
So, 46 years after Roe, and we're still fighting, we must do better. That's the other piece. I haven't read all of them. The headlines grip me enough.
I know.
And is it 46 years? Because today's the anniversary.
It is 46, so 73.
So what do you make of this? Because you are the political guru. What are you hearing on the streets? Like, what are you hearing in the political circles here? I mean, should Connecticut be all freaked out and worried? Or, I mean, we've got a Democratic governor. That might bode well for us. Is he on the side of this issue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we have, I can't even think of, even when we've had Republican governors, they've, and Lowell Weicker, who's one of the strongest advocates we ever had. But even Roland and Rail, were nominally pro-abortion, pro-choice, and of course Malloy and Lamont are as well. We codified Roe 30 years ago in 1990, which means we passed a state law that allows for abortion to be legal in our state. That's better than other states have done. And in fact, today, New York State, apparently the House and Senate will vote and Governor Cuomo will sign a law today, all at once on one day, that will do what we did 30 years ago.
Okay.
So there are states around
They're behind.
us very far behind. Rhode Island is struggling to pass a similar law.
What is the struggle? Because the anti-abortion people are strong.
In Rhode Island, they are. The Catholic Church seems to have a much stronger grip on General Assembly members, I guess.
Are they spending this much time on sexual predators in the claw?
I know. Wouldn't that be?
That'd be a good use of money.
Yes, right.
I'm just saying. If they asked me, I would tell them, this is how you should use your money.
Right.
Rather than paying off people, do this work. Okay.
So we're hopeful. Rhode Island is part of our Planned Parenthood's turf. So we are hopeful, and I'm heading up there tomorrow, and they're introducing a wonderful bill.
And so, do you feel like it's going to pass? Like, do you feel like?
Well, there's been some devious undercutting of our our bill sponsors going on in Rhode Island, but the public is certainly with us. The polls are very strong. I think people are really fed up with the way this issue's been handled in Rhode Island, and so there's just a lot of activism going on. So I hope that's sometimes what it takes. It takes, fear and frustration before people, actually get motivated. And it just feels like Rhode Island is out of whack with the rest of New England, let alone the rest of the country. But if you look at a map of our country, and you look at policies that favor women's reproductive health and rights, or anyone's reproductive health and rights, people's reproductive health and rights, it's really the coasts. You see California, Washington, Oregon. Oregon had passed an amazing bill 2 years ago. And then, of course, our mostly New England. When you get further down, actually beyond New York, when you get to Pennsylvania, not so great. New Jersey, better. Maryland, pretty good. And then you start getting further south, and things aren't so good. So it's really
the Bible Belt.
Yep. And the Midwest, it is honestly, if you start with North Dakota and go straight down the country, that's the worst, actually, that whole Midwest.
And so what is the religious makeup there?
Well,
is that what's driving this? Is this some kind of religious belief system? I'm just trying to understand, why is California and the East Coast get it, and then the middle of the country and the South feel some kind of way?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I presume it's Protestantism that's the primary, faith, but that, of course, has so many different denominations within it. It's hard to know who's in the driver's seat there. And interestingly, some of these states, Missouri, for example, they do tend to elect better people to Congress than they do to their own General Assembly. This is the case with Rhode Island, where they send good people to the U.S. Congress, but their own General Assembly is far more conservative, and sometimes their governors are too.
Wow,
So
that's interesting.
it is interesting.
How does that happen?
Well, some of these congressional and of course U.S. senators run statewide, so they get the breadth of voters, from cities, from towns,
that
from
would make
rural
sense.
areas. Whereas, if it's a farm-based economy in a state like Missouri, perhaps, there's just a lot more smaller legislative districts that are conservative and rural and. Perhaps, and look at a House district in a rural area where a couple of hundred votes, literally the membership of a single church, could define the election result. So sometimes that faith leaders get very engaged in the conversation.
Yeah, there are faith leaders who believe in a woman's right to choose.
That's
right?
Absolutely.
Because I belong to a church that was all about that, right?
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
Listen. A woman could make a decision about her body based on what she needs for herself.
Yep. And there's a sort of reactivated chapter here in Connecticut of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice.
Oh, okay.
RCRC has a Connecticut chapter that's kind of doing some interesting new work.
Okay. So the last thing on the thing that you sent me, what would a role reversal look like in the short and long term? Do we even want to frame that? Like, I don't think, can we?
Well,
should we be thinking about that?
Well, I try not to. I mean, I think what was interesting in the piece, though, which, if you don't mind me segueing into, this is kind of interesting, is the fact that back in the day, first of all, one day I was in New York City years and years ago, and I found, vendors on the street selling old magazines. And there was this old magazine with a picture of Ho Chi Minh on the front cover. So you can tell how old that was. And it had an article about the state of abortion in America. This was like 1969. Most of the people who got abortions back then were married. They were married women. Women got married young. Women had babies young. If you were 32 years old, you might have already had 5 or 6 kids and be exhausted and desperate. And so that's who sought abortion way back then. And things, of course, culturally have changed. Birth control has helped women postpone childbearing very often, to a somewhat later age. Women don't get married necessarily in order to have children and so forth. But of course, today, the average abortion patient is between 20 and 30. It's not a teenager, but it's also not someone over 30 in general. Sometimes, of course, it can be. And we have, back then, women would desperately ingest chemicals,
my God.
Awful things, or they douche with something terrible, some, lye or some horrible thing which would burn them and hurt them and not always even create an abortion, to be honest with you. Today, however, we have abortion by pill. And a majority of the patients who come to Planned Parenthood seeking an abortion before about 10 weeks of pregnancy, actually, more than 60%, actually choose this regimen of pills to cause a miscarriage. And so, at least one of those 2 pills is available without prescription and
right at the drugstore. There's like Plan B, right? Or
well, there's that, which is the morning after pill, which of course helps too. That's within a few a day or so of knowing that you had unprotected sex, you can try that. Of course, it's effective. But if you are actually you're pregnant, you've had a pregnancy test, you're pregnant. There are these pills. Mifepristone is the prescription pill that we provide. And it's followed up by another a pill called misoprostol. Misoprostol has been known to create the kind of cramping that's required to cause a miscarriage and is available in other countries, probably on the internet. And sometimes people say that you can buy it in a flea market or some other sort of an official setting, even here. So I think what will happen, for one thing, is that there will be a lot of information out there about how to procure these pills and use them yourself safely. Of course, people will need information about how much, what the dosage might be.
But still, like that's
I know.
That's some unregulated kind of scary. Now you're gonna see women showing up at the emergency room with issues.
Well, and our protocol for use of those pills, even today, requires an ultrasound so that we actually understand that you are within the earliest stages of pregnancy and eligible for this method.
Mm-hmm. So God help you if you.
So if you're too late and you're misjudged, I don't think it'll do anything harmful. It just won't actually cause an abortion.
Okay.
So I think that you would be unsuccessful.
Mm-hmm.
But sadly that's in a lot of the rest of the world where healthcare is harder to come by. These methods are more commonly used, and people make use of them or understand how to get them.
Susan, do you think the ordinary average person understands what this means? That to undo this would be such a hardship for so many people. Do you think that? I don't get the sense oftentimes that people understand what's at stake. I think it feels like when I talk to people or when I listen to people, it's this knee-jerk, like somehow or other, this is the destruction of mankind. And people really get on a terror about this in ways that I just find stunning to me still, after we've lived with this for almost 50 years. And I have these conversations with people and they still feel, and it's mostly men that who feel some kind of way about this, but there are some women who feel this way too. So what have we been able to do in terms of re-educating people about what this means? Are we doing a good job of that? I know there's a lot.
Well,
I was thinking about this because because on one hand, Susan, people are very clear. This is, women have a right to choose. But then there's those other people who I don't know how to talk to them. I don't know how to gauge them. Well,
I do think, and I'll give Rhode Island as an example, only that the polls there recently, which framed things in the notion of abortion becoming illegal if Kavanaugh's role on the Supreme Court leads us in the direction of a case, and there will be cases coming down the pipeline sooner than later that gives them an opportunity to reverse Roe, that in a state like Rhode Island where they have not codified it, the numbers are very high. People really support making abortion legal in Rhode Island. So I don't know whether to say that it's sort of the clear and present danger of something happening close to home that makes you feel that way. It could. For those who live in states where for example, states like Mississippi, where you're already out of luck. If you don't live, I forget where the one clinic is in the state of Mississippi. It's undoubtedly in a large city, which if you live far away from there, as it is, the impediments to you, if you're low income, if you don't have transportation, if you have to take time off from work because it's so far to travel that you need a couple of days to get there and back, or that they have, impediments like 24-hour waiting periods and things like that require you be there for some time. You had your 24 hours and you have to wait around to get the procedure. People are already, I hate to say it, but probably feel like they're in that era of, how available is safe legal abortion to them anyway.
So
it's sad.
So do you think poor women will be affected by this?
Oh,
a great deal?
Oh, for sure. Yes. Yeah. And already there are only about 12 or 13 states, we being one of them, that allow the state portion of our Medicaid program to cover a low-income woman's abortion. Otherwise, there are some funds, some privately run abortion funds that folks volunteer to, organize and dispense money to clinics to provide, to support the cost of care for those who can't afford it and aren't eligible for Medicaid. But, otherwise people are out of pocket for these costs.
Mm-hmm. And what do they run? Do you know? Do you have a ballpark?
Well, I mean, an early sort of uncomplicated procedure, depending on whether it's with, it's sort of what we would call a medical abortion, meaning sort of a suction abortion versus a pill, so that it might require anesthesia versus no need for it. Is probably $500 or $600.
And that's a good chunk of change.
Yeah,
like that's
for a lot of people would be
a
lot.
And
most of us try very hard to make that doable for folks. But, but that's, like I say, we're a state among maybe 12 or 13 where our Medicaid program at least makes sure that the poorest women in our state do have access if they qualify for Medicaid. If you live in one of these other southern or midwestern states, the chances of getting that sort of help are probably low.
So Susan, talk a little bit about how Connecticut got here. What is our history around this issue? We've codified this 30 years ago. How did we get there? What was the climate like for us to get there?
It's funny because I still worked at Planned Parenthood then. That's been a long time ago. And I will say prior to all of that was Griswold versus Connecticut, the big U.S. Supreme Court case that legalized birth control in 1965. And I always say, maybe did on your show last time, that this was not a badge of courage for Connecticut. This was a badge of shame. Our General Assembly refused to legalize contraceptives for years. And women from New Haven.
So you mean to tell me that women could not get birth control? They'd have to black market it or something?
Yeah, that's right. You would drive to Westchester County, and it was more accessible in New York or legal in New York, and you could get a diaphragm, or in the very early day of the pill, you could get the pill if you drove and you were married and could sort of either say you were married or lie about it, but it was for married folks. And even Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court ruling applied to married couples.
That is
which, of course,
outrageous.
We didn't, by which we did not mean same gender couples.
Oh, I know. Nobody was having that
like
conversation.
Married man to a woman would be able to qualify for contraceptives. So I just put that in the context of Connecticut was not really, the General Assembly was not favorable to reproductive freedom. And then Roe v. Wade came along in 1973 and was based on the same privacy argument that Griswold had been developed in Griswold. And by 1990, I guess we were just, there had been a case that had said that Connecticut should cover abortion with its state Medicaid dollars. So that happened in the middle 80s. And then all of a sudden in 89, the first Supreme Court ruling came along. It was called Webster versus Reproductive Health Care, and it was from a center out in Missouri. Had something to do, if I recall correctly, with allowing publicly funded hospitals not to perform abortion in their hospitals. And that just ignited people here. Folks from the ACLU, Shelley Jabal, who's a professor at Yale now.
Yes.
You may know.
I do.
Martha Stone, who runs the Center for Children's Advocacy, Planned Parenthood, and all the other advocates, including NARAL and NOW, really banded together strongly along with legislators. And those were the days Nancy Wyman was in the state house. George Jepson was in the House. Richard Blumenthal was the state senator. I mean, all the folks that have gone on to, impressive leadership roles were, earlier in their careers were in the General Assembly. And we just, we worked hard. It was an election year. It was 1990, and it was February. We had a rally up at the Capitol on a day that was very much like this weekend past. Sleet, freezing rain, horrible cold weekend. We had a couple thousand people up at the Capitol outdoors, and we got it done in one session. And the idea that it was this one, fairly, when you think about today and the many Supreme Court rulings we've had since then on abortion rights and access, Webster versus Reproductive Health Services was a fairly minor incursion, but a harbinger of what was to come. And so I guess all I can say is that we were just laser focused on getting it done, and we had a wonderful group of advocates and lobbyists and legislators themselves who were willing to say this is important.
Mm-hmm.
So yay for Connecticut.
Yeah, yay for Connecticut.
Because New York State's going to do it today, and it's 30-some years later.
Know. But, all the players are in place, right?
Well, they have waited all these years. They have not had the right Senate.
Mm-hmm. And now they do.
To show you, how important elections are.
Well, this will be good. So the fact that it's codified doesn't mean somebody can uncodify it.
That's true. Yes, that is true. The same General Assembly with a whole lot of different folks could overturn it. I mean, I suppose one could argue that and there have been some who do, that a constitutional amendment should be the route that we take. But in Connecticut, that would mean a couple of General Assembly votes and then putting it on the ballot for the voters. And that's just a whole other, that's not something we do in Connecticut very often. We don't often vote on issues. Seldom do the issues get on our ballot, unlike California and places where
do
that all the time. So that would be probably a difficult strategy.
So do you? I'm sure there are people who are strategizing on how to uncodify things here.
Well, I don't know.
I don't think people who are silent. Are they silent here? The ones who are anti?
They're not silent. There are a couple of issues that they work on every year. They are oftentimes motivated by the idea that young folks should have parental consent in order to get an abortion, and so they focus on that. We feel strongly that minors actually oftentimes have very good reasons for not involving family members that sometimes have to do with risk and abuse and fear. And it is not a large number of young folks anyway who seek abortion each year. So we support, we defend, we fight for young folks' access. But that that has been the primary issue that our opponents have focused on year after year. And I would think it would have to be a very different General Assembly than the one we just elected.
Yeah,
that would overturn our state abortion.
Wow. So Rhode Island is primed. They're primed.
Yes, they are. I'm up there tomorrow, and I think they're ready to fight.
And your expectation is that this will pass with them.
Well, I think so. It's a little more complicated than we would like it to be, but politically. But yes, I think so.
Okay.
I would be surprised if it just died of complexity. I think it will go forward. And we have a governor who's, supportive.
Is he a new governor?
No, Gina Raimondo. It's her second term. She just got reelected.
Okay. Yes. And so she is on this issue.
Yes.
Okay, good. That's good. What it sounds like you got your work cut out for you around these.
Yeah.
So tell me your thoughts on the anniversary. Like, what gives you pause around this time for Roe v. Wade? What gives you pause?
Well, I guess the reason I sent you that article today was that whole idea of, what we don't even think about. The unthinkable is what would happen to pregnant women who didn't have this right in a world that is more punitive than the world used to be. I sadly think we had we may not have had legal abortion back in the 50s or 60s, but we did seem to have a kinder demeanor towards folks. Right now, I feel like we're in a culture of cruelty. As we sit here and government workers are desperate, and so I don't know. That's what gives me pause, is that were abortion to become illegal by Supreme Court act, what would that really mean in women's lives, the lives of pregnant women, and the fear, the illegality, the underground. And to be honest with you, I'm sure are women who come to our country from countries where abortion is illegal and do not understand, because of language barriers and cultural barriers, that abortion is actually legal here and accessible, and they are already seeking illegal
Hmm.
abortions or even trying to self-abort because they don't understand that,
Mm-hmm.
that this could be available.
Wow. Man.
So there's already a story to be told about that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if we go, I mean, desperation will cause people to do a lot of things,
Yep.
you know. And if you feel desperate about your reproductive life, you know, no matter where you are on that spectrum, a mother with 4 kids and maybe another one on the way, or a young woman just starting out, or